Today we have back, again as usual by popular demand, we have Graham Furnis, who's a senior consultant with ThoughtRock. Graham is fully immersed and passionate in providing ITSM solutions. He is a business-driven IT professional with 20-plus years of technology and management experience. And Graham is certified as an ITIL manager and expert, as well as an accredited ITIL instructor. So with that, I will turn things over to Graham. Graham.
Great, thanks a lot, Rick. And again, welcome back to all our ThoughtRock members, new and old. Today's topic, we're just going to start getting into, I thought I'd do sort of a series on some of the new 2011 refresh areas. And today's topic is in the area of a new process called design coordination. And to kind of get you thinking, is it really needed? So when we go through things today, I want to just kind of go over what the process is and some of the ins and outs of it, and just kind of think about, you know, is this something that can help your organization? Why is it there, and how is it positioned to help organizations move forward with their service management initiatives and growing maturity of what's already been implemented. So as Rick and Wanda were saying, any questions that come up, feed them into the chat window, and then Rick, being the moderator, he can keep track of these, and he'll pop it up when we have when he sees an opportunity. So again, we try and keep to our lunchtime period here. The agenda today is nice and straightforward. So we just look at basically the purpose of service design, coordination, just to understand exactly what it's trying to do, the way that ITIL's positioned it. I'll start adding my own sort of interpretation on top of that. What's the scope of this process? So we know that ITIL is pretty big. You know, how far does the octopus legs of design coordination, how far out do they go? And when they reach out, what are the key interfaces? So how is it linking into the rest of the life cycle and creating a system for doing service management? So then we'll go through and while we're looking at those interfaces, discuss some of the process activities, and at the end we'll come up and I'll sort of present my ideas of a key concept within design coordination, which helps understand a bit about, you know, is it really needed, and where should it be positioned. Okay, so with that, we'll get started. And the first piece I want to sort of go over is to bring up the good old ITIL lifecycle diagram with the 2011 processes in here. So it just gives a good perspective of what I'm talking about and where it positions. So we're over here in service design, and right at the top, in the way I presented the diagram here, this is our process right here for design coordination. So in terms of the 2011 updates to ITIL itself, design coordination is a new process, sort of sitting on top of all of the other design processes. Over in, just while we're here too, over in service strategy, business relationship management, and a clarification of strategy management are new and improved areas there. And up in continual improvement, they've narrowed it down to just one process called the 7-step improvement process. So those are just the big changes that have come about. And what I'll do in the next little while is get into each one of these and try and give a bit of an overview of how it fits in. But again, today's focus is right here again at design coordination. And I picked this one because it was an interesting one. When I was going through and understanding it and looking for how have I dealt with this in the past, you know, it led to the title for our presentation, Is It Really Needed? You know, all these things are needed, but it's a matter of, you know, can it be done somewhere else? So let's get into a bit more about what design coordination is. And I'll go down to our next slide here. So design coordination, I've copied over all of the service design processes, and I've let service design, or sorry, design coordination stick out. So the main justification is that, rightly so, from my project background and development background in IT, the design activities over here, very detailed and complex. And whenever you've gone through gathering requirements and trying to break that down to the technical specifications and operational specifications, there's quite a bit of upfront work, quite a bit of challenge, which leads to later on some operational issues, which show up in the form of incidents and problems and emergency changes. So getting design right from the beginning and getting it right at the end is a very important focus. And of course, ITIL is all about trying to be effective and efficient in the way that we're doing things. So the key word here is that because it is detailed and complex, we need to have a well-coordinated set of actions. And this is what design coordination will do. Design coordination will take all of these process areas in the service design lifecycle phase and try and coordinate its actions across any type of new IT service or component change or any type of update. So its overall purpose then is that it becomes a single point of coordination and control for basically all of the other activities that make up the design lifecycle stage. So that's our first slide, and then just moving into our next one. Then I'll just talk a bit more about the scope of activities.
And Graham, just a quick question before you go on to that next slide. But I think maybe it's one of the obvious questions that will probably come to us today. But before the refresh, where was this activity being done?
Well, that's a good question. Before the refresh, and actually I can use this diagram to highlight a few things. In fact, I'll change to a highlighter. So there were a couple of places for it. Service level management. It wasn't explicitly put into word for word saying service level management is doing the design coordination activity. But before, it was always assumed that service level management is reaching out and coordinating. Whoops, took away all my highlights, but that's okay. All of these areas down here. So it'll send out, and we have a separate process to document the catalog updates that relate to each new service or major change. It'll delegate out to availability, capacity, security, and continuity for all of the warranty aspects, and let supplier management deal with the underpinning contracts. So what's been happening actually is a very good trend and something which is correct. In version 2 and earlier versions of ITIL, this process was really heavily overloaded. Right before, there wasn't a service catalog process before version 3, and there wasn't a supplier management process. So all of the extra work of creating a catalog and documenting contracts and agreements with my suppliers and how to deliver service, it was all sort of rolled up into service level management. So in version 3, these processes here became new to make service level management more efficient and focused. And now we have design coordination, which exists to make service level management more focused as well. So typically that's where the improvement and the correct direction has come out. We're letting service level management refocus on defining those service level targets and requirements and just deal with managing those types of things. The other thing, just to mention it quickly while we're here, if I go back to my previous slide, here we are. The life cycle phase itself, service design, in the current and the past version 3 ITIL books, ITIL is always described a manager, a service design manager, a service transition manager. Each life cycle stage had a manager, and quite often the high-level coordination and management aspects were given to this life cycle level manager. So again, this is just more formally now broken it out to say that we do need a design coordination because companies are having a lot of challenge in coordinating all the activities involved in design. So, so good question. And so going back down to our slides here, so we know that we have now a single point of contact to manage all of these things about coordinating our design activities and processes. And the basic scope of activities, if I go into this next slide here, from an ITIL wording point of view, it's limited to the design stage only. Now, I personally have a bit of a challenge with that. I know it's coordinating the design processes, but as we start discussing a few different things, design, in my past experience, design is not really a linear type of activity. You come back to it over and over again. But for now, the scope of the activity is limited to the design stage. The key thing in these activities is the high-level view. So we have all of these policies, guidelines, standards, and budgets. We keep track of what people are working on, what types of projects and design work. And because we keep track of this high-level view across all processes and all potential changes in design activity going on, this process can provide the high-level coordination, prioritization, and scheduling of these design activities. Right? So it makes sense. We need to have this activity done. As we'll start discussing things that can be done in many different places. So following those activities then, it's assisting projects or change management because of course they're going to run through and do these activities or ensure they're done. It's focusing on utility and warranty. And it's one of the things which ITIL version 3 has been talking about all along, is that we're very good at focusing on coming up with IT services that have certain functionality, good functionality, but typically where things fall down is in the warranty aspect. So again, ITIL wants to make sure that treat both equally, make sure you get all the proper requirements. And then the last thing is coming out of each of these design efforts, we have the service design package. And because there's so many different people working on so many different aspects of a design, the design coordination process will make sure that that service design package is produced and that all of the appropriate documentation and planning and so on and designs are all referenced, and we have good tracking of where it is.
And Graham, that seems like a pretty important component. Can you, I don't know if you're going to in the next few slides or now, could you expand a little bit more on the service design package?
Yes, it is definitely a key concept within ITIL itself. And it's not just a concept for design. This is really a concept for transition as well as the operation of services. So just in case anyone's not familiar, the service design package, it starts off in the design stage. And again, if I go back to probably the life cycle diagram, we can jump around a little bit here. So everything that comes out of our design stage, we want to put it into this package. And basically what the package is, whoops, my D isn't too good. It's not so much a documentation management system. It's more of a referencing system. We have a whole bunch of service level agreements that are going to produce unique documents and plans. We have basic service catalog entries, availability plans, right? All of these things have so many different levels of the designs and plans. So all of these things are referenced under one common service ID or denominator, and that forms the concept of the service design package. So this gets taken over here into service transition, and then service transition says, great, we have all of the build, test, and implement specifications. We're going to add more to it because we're the ones actually doing the build, test, and implement. So this service design package gets bigger as it goes through service transition. And then if at the very end here, let's kind of circle it, transition says, great, we've done all the things from our design specifications, and we've added our build, test, implement plans, because if we want to do this again, we have the plans to do it. But one of the things you start off with in the design level, always plan how you're going to operate and report from the very beginning. So part of that service design package now gets put out there into the operational environment as standard operating procedures, maintenance procedures, support procedures, ITIL talks a lot about change models and incident models and problem models. All of these things are the operational aspects of that service design package. So you can imagine from this description, if you haven't heard it before, or if you're familiar with it, it's a very big relationship of all the documents and plans that we've produced, and it becomes critical when we get to the operational stage to know what we're actually doing and managing from a business perspective. So again, something big and complex, especially for a new service or a very complicated service, goes back to justifying the need for having a design coordination activity, because you need someone to kind of track and put this thing into place and make sure nothing is missing. So let's get into the discussion that hopefully we can prompt a few people to think and ask some questions. So is it really needed? Right? There's a lot of good things about it, but this slide here kind of indicates that there's other areas that design coordination is assisting, but maybe this activity is already being done in these other areas, and we don't necessarily need a separate process for it. So we'll go through a combination of things, and let me jump down to my next slide. So we'll have a discussion. Here's the basic interfaces for design coordination, and these are the ones in which we can have a little discussion about maybe we don't need design coordination, it can fit within one of these other areas. So we have project management. This is in an ITIL process area, but I highly recommend any company, if you don't have a project management office or practice, you should do, in my humble opinion. And so there's a very close relationship, which ITIL talks about with project management. In strategy, we have the service portfolio management, so we'll talk about that relationship. Business relationship management, transition planning and support, and of course change management, because every change should make sure that proper design work is done. So let's quickly go through each one of these and see if it prompts any thoughts, and then we'll get down to one of the key considerations about whether or not this process is needed or not. So let's start off with project management over here. So the first thing with project management, just from a very high level, so when you have some type of major change or update to an IT service, or maybe a brand new service, you typically are going to manage this with project management. And in fact, in my experience, the majority of companies take that approach. So they're going to start off here, and they have the project charter, the goals and objectives. They understand what they're trying to basically deliver at the end. So the typical project management activities, you define your project scope and constraints. You take a look at all projects in the organization and prioritize it based upon business need. And then you start assembling all the resources and schedules, and then you start to put things together in the project plan. And of course, one of the key things in the project plan, you need to gather requirements. So you're basically, as part of project management, you want to go ahead and start specifying, here's the different requirements I need from the design stage, later on transition and operation. So as a quick sort of point here, why wouldn't we leave design coordination as an activity within project management? Because project management is going to have to go and define the requirements and start to coordinate the resources to define and document those requirements across the entire project. So, there could be very well an argument saying that project management can handle this. The only thing that project management typically doesn't do, service management in ITIL is a very defined and expert area. So when it comes to the design activities within design coordination, project management doesn't necessarily create all of the policies that would be there and all of the design standards. They typically would go out, and the key word I put back in here somewhere, yeah, here it is, they assemble project resources. They don't necessarily define them. So one of the things where you might say, would probably fall down and not be consistent in doing our design activities is that with project management, unless your organization has structured it, that it's the one setting a lot of the standards and repeatable routines, project management would typically not go and define the key policies and coordination activities that design coordination would do as a separate process. Right? So we have both pros and cons. It depends on your organization, but certainly project management is a potential for taking over the design coordination activity. So again, we'll just do some basic comments on these, and then we'll get into some summary points. Let's take a look at our next one then. So what about then we'll move into the strategy processes. So let me go down, down one more slide here. So this time, we're in transition. So here we're talking about change management. And to me, these are the two closest interfaces with design coordination. So what about the activities of change management, and isn't it a duplication, again, perhaps with design coordination? So what does change management focus on? It's an audit process that makes sure that every time we do a new or modified change or removal of a service, we make sure that all of the correct planning, design, build, test, and implement steps are followed in relation to the way that we've assessed the change. So, change management, the key thing here in the second bullet point, anyone familiar with ITIL and change management, it can be a lifecycle-wide process. If you're just doing a simple operational change, you probably don't have a lot of design activity that you need to do. But when you're doing a major change or a large project, which involves several changes, you're probably going to have a lot of design work to do. And part of the change process is to make sure that those design steps are followed, and that is done in relationship to the correct assessment and priority of the change. And we also have change models as part of a standard ITIL concept to say that we should apply these to each of our changes, and that when you're doing a change of a certain type or maybe even a certain service, do it the same way each time. So because of these change models and making sure that we're doing things, we're essentially doing some of this design coordination work. We're going to make sure that service level management defines or updates agreements, that we go out and update the planning within availability, capacity, continuity, security, whatever it might be. And our change model can more or less make sure that everything is followed. So, very much you can let some of this design coordination, if not all of it, sit within your change management process. But again, some of the reasons you might not want to do that, change management itself is focused on change and within the transition lifecycle. It doesn't typically define the different policies and standards that service design wants to bring out when we're dealing with different services. Right? It's up to the design stage to make sure we know the level and depth of each set of activity around some type of new design. So change management might fall down here because they don't really have the focus. They're an audit process, not really a high-level design process. They're all about making sure that things are properly built, tested, and implemented. So they could do it. And in a smaller organization, you could very well let things sit here. But the more mature you get with service management, and the more defined your activities need to be, the more change management is going to get kind of overwhelmed in trying to handle design coordination. So let's go down one more step. I think our next one is transition planning and support, which it is. So transition planning and support. This process has been in the current and previous ITIL version 3 books. The overall purpose of transition planning and support, essentially I can describe it, it's the equivalent to design coordination. They could have called this transition coordination. So you're doing the same thing essentially as in the design coordination process. You're maintaining all of your policies and standards and models for different transition activities and processes. Its focus is across just transition, but because change within transition has to deal with making sure different types of plans are followed and designs are followed, it's going to have a crossover with design coordination. So if you look at the description here, very similar to design coordination, but again with a transition focus. So we're planning, prioritizing, and coordinating transition resources. We can manage multiple transitions at the same time, just like design coordination does with design. And we're interfacing with projects, our suppliers, whatever types of teams and changes are going on. So very much, again, because this is a high-level process and because it's important that transition is in the middle between design, transition, and operation, transition needs to have a good view and an overview of knowing what's going on and making sure the correct designs are created and coordinated before they go into the build, test, implement, and finally the operation aspect. So very much they have a vested interest, but it's becoming similar in all these different arguments. They're focused primarily in this process on coordinating all the people doing the build, test, implement. So this process makes sure, do we have our developers online to do the actual development work? Do we have our testing environment set up? Are we set up to do the evaluations post-pilot or initial implementation? And are we set up to make sure that releases are properly transitioned and proper training and acceptance is done from a user and a support point of view? So again, its focus is more after design than during design, but you could make an argument, add the design coordination to it so that it's a single focus for the two areas. And so a quick comment then on the top two levels. We'll do this one next, the portfolio management and business relationship management. These are the next two combinations. So our next area, business relationship management. So this is one of the new process areas that's in the new ITIL refresh up here in strategy. So what this particular process is focused on, it's the interface between the service provider themselves and the actual customer. And this is the process area that's really focused on making sure we understand the customer and their needs. So when we truly need to understand what does the customer need to accomplish, how important is it from a business perspective, the business relationship management process, we have the people on the ground to make sure we get these types of requirements. And the requirements which, again, we really focus on in ITIL is focusing on both utility and on warranty. So our business relationship management process is put in place here at a strategy level to make sure we really understand the customer. We know what they require from a utility and warranty perspective, and we know what the customer currently has in terms of their current services and what it can do and what they need. So with this particular process here, because we're dealing with specific utility and warranty requirements, perhaps we can focus on that design coordination activity. There could be an argument saying, well, give it to this process here because this process needs to make sure that once things are operational and during the design requirements gathering, we're focusing across all of the different levels of detail that are needed to be coordinated when we get to the actual design and then build, test, and implement activities. Again, though, the main difference here between design coordination and business relationship management is that here we're really getting the high-level business requirements. And when it comes down to actually getting into detailed design specifications, right, the design specifications is an interpretation of these business requirements, which says, again, we probably want an area of a bit more focus that's more technically focused about how do we do these business requirements, as well as what level do we do them at. So again, in small companies, you're going to have to sort of roll up a couple of these processes together. But the more mature you get, the more you can see a justification for breaking down a separate design coordination process. Now our last one, and then we'll get into the wrap-up and my key comment about what makes design coordination unique. We have one more thing. Here we go, service portfolio management. So why can't we let the design coordination activity reside up here? Because portfolio management, this is the one that is basically defining your IT services and then tracking them in a service portfolio. And so tracking that investment or the service throughout its life cycle. So it's very high end. It's in strategy. It's all business focused. This is where we create the business cases to say why a particular service exists, what priority to the business that service should be, and then because of that that link, in this part here where we're talking about truly understanding the business outcomes and priorities of the service, therefore we're going to determine the level of activity we go through when we go into the design phase of the life cycle, later on when we go into the transition phase. So why don't we design or define some of these design activities and the depth of those activities up here in portfolio management. And again, it could be done. It's not a really strong area to do it though, because really what this whole process is focused on, let's see if I can write it here, we're focused on constantly measuring and ensuring that the business case for a service exists and is constantly being justified to say, you know, it's still a priority to the business, it's still delivering business results, and we don't want to get into the detail about how do we do things so much as is it producing results. So it does have, though, the end-to-end kind of business focus for design and transition. So again, you could make an argument that design activities could be there. But again, probably in a company that really wants to focus on really streamlining design, we have this separate design coordination process. So if it's just managing design activities, I would argue that you could probably fit it in somewhere else, and you don't necessarily need a design coordination process. But what really sets it apart is my next slide here. So here's where we go into the wrap-up. So the key concept, the critical activity that makes design coordination something that stands out as a unique area that needs a unique set of focus, is this first comment here that comes from the ITIL Refresh books. So they recognize that not every design activity requires the same level of intense design work. And this is actually a true comment which I've had with ITIL for many years. You know, it's basically a sliding scale where you need some business rules and engines to make sure that when you do different types of change activity or incident management activity or design activity, it's all relative to the importance of the service and how you're trying to structure it. So getting back to this slide then, so when we talk about not every design requiring the same level of rigor or design activities, we're saying that for very simple things, you don't need to go through a heavy design coordination process because there's probably not a lot of design activity you need to do. But in the next bullet point here, the more significant that project or change becomes, the higher up the scale you go for saying, well, my checklist of things I need to design for is getting bigger. And once you get into that sliding scale, at some point you're going to say, you know, it's getting complicated. And now it would be good if we had a specific area of focus to make sure that some process is there to coordinate all the activities. And the most important thing is they can coordinate it based upon a model or a policy. So this is really the key point right here. Someone has to come up with those set of rules about when do we go into having a very detailed checklist of design activity. What would be in that detailed checklist and sliding scale model. If we have a design coordination process, they're going to be working across the different life cycle stages, they'll be interfacing with all those pieces that I talked about previous to make sure that we come up with an agreed set of business rules, saying that when you have a significant change, here's all the things we're going to do. It's going to take a lot of time, but it's worth it because this particular process is very important from a business point of view. By doing that, you can minimize the bureaucracy, and you can maximize the effectiveness of your designs from utility, warranty, and basically cross-lifecycle considerations. So you go slow when you become detailed, and you become successful when important. You become fast and efficient when you don't need to go through quite as much rigor. So this is the real key benefit to having design coordination. By having a specific process which is focused on this design coordination, and the key thing here is that it defines that sliding scale, right? What's our policy, what's our model to say, here's how much activity we do with this type of priority and impact of change or project. That's where the design coordination process really shows benefit, and where it's a great addition to the new refresh version of the ITIL framework. Now, in smaller organizations, you probably can't afford to have 24 or 25 different processes out there. You probably combine a lot of the process roles, but this needs to be somewhere in your framework. You should be thinking of a dedicated design coordination focus, even if it's buried within change management or perhaps service portfolio management. Whatever suits your organization, that's the ITIL formula. Make it fit your company. But this should be a focus, because having that type of model to make decisions, that's what brings success out for any type of ITIL or ITSM framework. Okay, so that's where
so Graham,
we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, Graham, just a question there, just to make sure that I guess understanding exactly what your opinions are and thoughts on this. So, are you concluding that this should definitely be a separate process that an organization should implement in their adoption program for ITIL?
I would say not so much the word process. A lot of the things, if I go back to the first slide, if I put a stake in the ground, sorry, let me try and get back there. Oh, there we go. My machine's a bit slow. So going back to the process diagram here, again, we're just talking about design coordination, but in terms of should this be a separate dedicated process, my statement at the end is it should definitely be a service management activity. If you warrant enough volume of activity and you have a large enough staff to make it a dedicated process, then it's totally justified to do so. But there's not many companies out there, and in fact I don't know any company that has everything. Not every company has every single process. Again, based upon the way that you've implemented ITIL, you may combine things, right? Maybe you only have a service level management process, and it's doing the work of service catalog management and supplier management. So maybe you roll service design coordination into that process. But what I'm saying, though, is that whether or not it's a process or not, it definitely should be a consideration, a defined and sort of boxed-in consideration that we want to have a high-level design coordination focus. We want to come up with high-level design coordination policies and models that can be applied to all the different design activities, so that we're not just doing things at random. Every time a new project comes up, we don't want to come up with a new way of doing our designs, or, last week we went to all of these 20 different design aspects, and here we have another design this week, we're only doing 10. Right? You need something to make sure we have a rule book saying here's the way we do things based upon impact and priorities. So, so the answer is, for all of these things in the ITIL framework, and this is the way that I think is key for understanding the framework, all of these words and process areas here are things that you should be doing. And there's good justification if you read into them about what they're trying to do and how they provide some type of benefit to your service management initiative. If you don't make it a separate process area, then think about putting that area of focus somewhere in your service management model, so that someone is thinking about where am I doing the high-level design coordination policies and planning. You know, the same thing with transition. Where am I doing the high-level transition planning? Where am I doing my high-level change activities and so on? So that's the way to understand and work the ITIL framework. You don't have to have a dedicated process area, but I think going back to especially my last slide, here's where I really find the benefit. You know, you want to have a certain area that's focused on this concept of design coordination to come up with a rule book about how do we handle different designs based upon impact and priority. So hopefully that clarifies for everyone, and this is the way ITIL should have been presented from the beginning. It's what it's actually put into the book, is that these are just different areas that you can pick and choose from, and you're going to combine roles because of your organizational structure. But think about the activities. They're all there because ITIL's found from its practitioners and sources when writing the books that these are areas of focus that companies are succeeding with when they focus on these areas. So in my conclusion, in my last slide here, so I put in here that the activity of design coordination is critical. Whether or not you make it a separate process or not isn't so critical. It's just there is a good benefit to having a high-level design coordination activity. And that's what I mentioned in the next thing. Make sure it's high level, because that provides the rule book and the decision making. And then it can be a separate process or embedded within another process. Those are the main points.
Excellent, Graham. So we're just at 12:46 now, and there is a couple of questions I want to make sure that we get to. So hopefully, if everyone sticks around and just hears your response here. So I'll go with the first one. Given the dynamic changes in user technology, and then in parentheses such as VDI, bring your own device, the proliferation of IT into more aspects of the business, how can this help the support organization keep up with the increasing volume of related incidents?
I have to think about that. It's one step or two steps removed from the operational side. If I go back to people bringing their own devices in to work, so if I'm looking at this and saying we're going to support it in an organization, and I'm going to add this to my service catalog as something I'm supporting. Again, if I follow the little model that I have and the one that I usually propose. So in some way, I prioritize that, and I've given it some type of business impact in my service portfolio. As I go through in the design stage, we're not building these. These are, it's like when you have BlackBerries or anything else that you may bring into the organization. You're buying it from the outside. So you can't so much go through the internal build, but you can go through all the design checklists to say, well, here's the priority that we've assigned to the service. Here's the design activities that we should follow to make sure that we're going to be able to support and operate and maintain this particular new service, which has the device inside of it. So you would be going through the design activity, and part of that design activity, again, let me go back to my life cycle diagram here. So the main warranty aspects, that's these two here and these two. So we want to make sure, so what are our policies and plans to make sure that we have availability targets, but also how do we maintain things? What's our incident support policy from the beginning? You want to design that as part of the design activity. Design coordination would say, what extent do we go through? And then as it goes through transition, that service design package, if I draw it down here, that ends up here in service operation. So the design coordination process would have an impact on service operation, because the way that we plan on actually rolling things out and operating them is all specified in terms of the level of complexity through the design model, which is what design coordination is doing. And all of the different ways that you would say, well, here's how we've always tried to support these types of devices based upon impact and priority. Here's how we react to incidents. Here's our requests, our problem targets and planning. Here's our operational changes. all of those things from an operational support perspective start off again from saying, here's the extent of what we're going to plan for, starting with design, and then we can take that and transition it and put it into the operational environment. So hopefully that helps a little bit. This doesn't help directly. What it does is it indirectly helps because design coordination gives you the extent of forward planning that would lead to success in operation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Graham. And I just wanted to, again, time check. We better wrap up here. I wanted to, again, thank everybody for attending. Graham, if there's some further questions or people wanted to reach out to Graham directly, there's a couple of ways to do it. And one of the easiest ways is to send an email to info@thoughtrock.net and reference this discussion, and we'll make sure that we get you directly in touch with Graham to follow up on any of the specific questions that you might have on this topic or any of the other topics that Graham has spoke on throughout ThoughtRock. And again, this will be made available in ThoughtRock within 24 hours. This the webcast and the PowerPoints will also be available to, I believe, the webcast is available to all attendees, and I believe the PowerPoints and the slides are available to members only. So please, if you do, you can log into ThoughtRock and get access back and review what Graham has talked about. Again, I wanted to remind everybody for next week on November 22nd, we do have Phyllis Drucker from she's a business process consultant, and she'll be presenting Cloud Computing Transform 2 Services with some very specific learning nuggets, and all that information will be available up on ThoughtRock as well, and in your newsletter you'll see more information coming on Phyllis's discussion. So please join us then, or send that off to somebody else in your organization that you think that would be very relevant to. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us again today for another session of ThoughtRock. Graham, thank you very much. Interesting topic, new topic, obviously, with Refresh, so some things for people to maybe think about that they haven't had a chance to think about, and maybe some additional forthcoming discussions on the topic. I'm sure, Graham, I'm not sure if you have yet, but there may be some additional blogs on it, and maybe some follow-up discussions based on questions that people may have. So, Graham, with that, I wanted to again say thank you very much.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Rick. And again, I hope everyone found that to be informative enough to make you think a little bit about it and understand how all of these different process areas are doable, but they don't have to be separate processes. They can be embedded where appropriate. So Excellent. With that, thank you, everyone, and we'll let it wrap up from here.
Fantastic. We will leave this screen up for a few more minutes, so if you need to copy down the contact information. Otherwise, again, thank you very much. Have a great week, and hopefully we see many of you back on November the 22nd. Thank you.